Hey YouTube, this is Elk, and today we're doing Ask Reddit Narrated, Episode 3. What did you see that you definitely weren't supposed to see? I guess not me, but my dad. He stepped outside a bar one night on a rainy day to get more smokes from his car. This was back when you could smoke inside, and saw one guy kneeling on the ground, holding another dude's face down in a pothole puddle, and the other guy thrashing wildly. He said that instinct took over, and he just ran up and kicked the attacker in the head as hard as he could, knocking him out. He sat with the victim until he left to make sure the dude was okay and didn't try to murder the now unconscious attacker. Then he made an anonymous 911 call so that someone would tend to the unconscious guy, and left. He said it was the creepiest thing he ever walked in on, and he never went back to that bar again. My parents were getting ready to head out for a double date with my friend's parents. Everyone came over to our place beforehand and brought their kids because their oldest daughter was going to babysit the rest of us. The adults were in the kitchen chatting, and my siblings and I decided we wanted to show our new sitter this home video we made of a turtle we caught. None of the tapes were labeled well, so of course we end up putting on what turned out to be my parents' sex tape. 5 kids with our jaws on the floor watched as my mom pulled down my dad's boxers and started blowing him. Dad was hung apparently. The sitter, who was maybe 15 at the time, dove for the VCR and powered it off. Within seconds, all of the parents came through. "Okay kids, be good," met with our stunned silence. I used to lead/work on the Amazon book review team. One time I found a collection of child porn and bestiality images from the dark web that someone was trying to publish as a book on Amazon. I think the owner thought that if they didn't include any sexual keywords in the book's metadata, the reviewers wouldn't notice it. Saw a man crash his motorcycle into the back of a parked car. He flipped over the car, hitting his head on the pavement and dying on scene. Firefighters showed up and sprayed his brains and blood down the storm drain. Later I found out it was a girl's father who I went to middle school with. I was 12. One time I was up late at night scrolling Facebook at the same time as my drunk and high off Xanax married mother, who was an entire time zone away at the time. She was messaging an old fling from high school while her husband was away at work and was sending him close-up pictures of her vagina. How I know this is because she didn't send them via Messenger. She posted them on her actual Facebook page. I had to call her in the middle of the night in her zonked out stupor to get her password to delete pictures of her vagina off her own Facebook page. I was 16 and returning home after giving my neighbor a ride to her piano lesson. Ahead of me was a pickup truck loaded with sheetrock, wallboard. It was piled up so that it was higher than the cab of the truck. There was a family driving it. Dad and mom and 2 little kids were in the cab of the truck. The oldest daughter, about 10 years old, was given the honor, or task, of riding on top of the sheetrock to hold it down. I watched as the wind picked up the sheetrock, and she had a flying carpet for a few seconds before she slammed into the asphalt in front of me. I was able to stop before I hit her. I was the first to get to her. Blood was everywhere. She was blowing it out of her nose and mouth trying to breathe. Blood was coming out of her ears. A nurse was the second to come up. She told me to hold her head straight and talk softly to her. Her parents were obviously hysterical. By the time I got back in the car, I was covered in her blood. Face, neck, shoulders, hands, and the summer dress I had on. I was able to drive home, my friends and I both in shock. I tried to get in the house without anyone seeing me, as I looked like the accident victim. I walked past my mom to get to the shower and asked my friend to tell her what happened. My mom was so shocked by what she saw that she followed me. I got in the shower with my bloody clothes on to try and get the stains out. I will never forget that day. I should not have seen that tragedy. I watched the newspapers for several days. This was way before home computers, cell phones, and mandatory child safety seats. She died after several days in the hospital. That's how I found out her age, and that she had 2 younger siblings. My dad gave me a piece of furniture one time. When I got it home, A post-it note, which had been stuck to the bottom, floated down to the floor. I picked it up, and in my dad's unmistakable handwriting were various notes about gay personal ads he'd been responding to. Details about the other guys, their names and ages and sexual interests, the status of their conversations, etc. My dad was, at least I thought, very straight. I put two and two together and realized this piece of furniture was from an apartment he kept briefly while he and my stepmom were on the outs for about a year. None of this bothered me one bit, but I got the distinct impression that my stepmom, an older, very conservative lady, would have not been cool with any of this. I let him go to his grave without ever telling him. At 5 years old, I woke up to the snow finally starting to melt. I noticed a girl asleep in the garden. I went to tell my dad. He took one look and told me to go play in my room. Turns out the girl had been asleep in our front garden for about 2 weeks, buried and frozen under the snow. I didn't know she was dead until I was about 16, when I mentioned it to my dad. "Remember that girl asleep in the garden?" Dad said, "She was dead, you idiot." As far as I know, she was about late teens or early 20s. We lived in a pretty rough area, lots of drugs, etc. She had probably been out partying, sat on our garden wall, and passed out. I do not know the exact cause of death or toxicology report. That's really sad. One of my best friends died that way. He had one too many and sat outside to get some fresh air. Air was so fresh that he went into hypothermia and died on the front steps of the building, just like that. Rest in peace, Marcus. Don't let drunk or high friends go out by themselves when the elements can kill you. When I was still married, my then wife had left her phone on to run to the bathroom while I was in bed. I looked at it for the time and found it was left open to a secret Gmail account that she was using for sending literally hundreds of nudes back and forth between many, many guys for years. Up until that night, well, she was fully 6 months pregnant. Mostly original stuff too. I think that hurt more. My mom's attempted suicide. I was supposed to be at track practice, but skipped and caught the bus home. I walked in on my mom face down at her desk with pills and alcohol scattered around her. My family owns a liquor store. We also live on a busy street. I was around 13. Next to my bed was a window that allowed me to see outside while still in bed. So, one night I was doing exactly that, and I saw 3 drunken people, 2 dudes and a girl, walking down the middle of the street, arguing about something. Suddenly, one of the dudes pulls something out of his pocket, which I now know was a knife of sorts, and stabs the other dude in the chest. Then came the blood. There was so much blood. I called the ambulance, and they told me to call the cops because they can't respond when it is unsafe. So I did. They came around 30 minutes later after I had called, and the ambulance got there 10 minutes after that. The attacker and the girl just ran away when it happened, like this wasn't the first time they saw themselves in that situation. It was 1969, 10 years old, living out in the country in northeast Ohio. I was out in the backyard and heard tires screech and then a loud crash. I went in the house and told my mom to call the ambulance, and then I ran down the road a couple hundred yards to where the car crashed into a telephone pole. The guy's head was laying in the ditch. Rest of his body still in the car. Mostly. Crossing the street on Poplar in Memphis. Those of you that know it, right near the homeless shelter. Old man crossing the street up a bit gets hit by a car. When he lands, his skull just sort of opens up. His brains landed about 100 feet away from me on the pavement. He did not make it. My mom and sister were on vacation, so it was me and my dad home alone. It was past my bedtime or whatever, but I couldn't sleep, so I went downstairs to see what my dad was doing. As I'm going down, I see across my living room the silhouette of a woman walking by. I only saw it for a split second, so my dad came running towards me like, "Hey buddy, how's it going? Give me a hug." He held me back so I couldn't get past him to see who it was. I was hysterical because I thought it was my sister and they were playing a trick on me or something. My dad was quick to tell me, "Oh, you thought you saw a ghost? Let's call your mom and tell her that you thought you saw a ghost." Years later, my mom finds out my dad's been cheating, and now he's married to her. That guy sucks. That'll conclude today's Ask Reddit episode. Thank you so much for coming on this journey with me. If you liked the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Until next time.